From the very first moment the late afternoon sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Lexington estate, something felt strange, almost too still, too quiet, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Ethan Crawford, one of the youngest multi-millionaire CEOs in New York, lay motionless on his leather sofa, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady patterns. But he wasn't sleeping, not even close. He had intentionally closed his eyes, his mind sharp and alert, waiting. Waiting for the shy, soft-spoken maid he had recently hired, a girl who barely lifted her gaze when speaking and moved with the silent caution of someone who feared taking up space. He didn't know why, but today he wanted to see something about her, something beyond the surface. And as footsteps approached, he found himself unexpectedly nervous, unsure of what he would discover. If you believe in kindness, empathy, and second chances, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. Ethan had never been the type of man to pry into others' lives. Running Crawford Tech consumed him, demanded everything he had, his time, his energy, even his emotional capacity. But ever since Grace Miller stepped into his mansion 2 months ago, something about her had stirred a quiet curiosity inside him. She was hardworking, humble, and almost painfully gentle. She never complained, no matter how many rooms she cleaned or how heavy the tasks were. Yet she carried an invisible heaviness, like someone with a past that whispered through her careful movements. Ethan had started noticing things, how she paused at the library entrance as if gathering courage before stepping in, how her eyes softened whenever she arranged books on his shelves, how she always left a small, folded note of encouragement on the kitchen counter for the older staff members. She expected nothing in return, not even acknowledgement. She simply gave. Quietly. Consistently. That was why Ethan had decided, for the first time, to test someone, not out of arrogance, but out of a strange longing to understand her. He had left a stack of $100 bills on the round wooden table deliberately placed in the center of the library where she would see it. Not as a trap, but as a window. He wanted to know whether her soft presence hid any shadows, any desperation that could push a person to steal. But deep inside, he hoped she would prove to be exactly who she seemed, a rare kind of heart in a world that often hardened people. When Grace entered the library, she didn't notice him at first. Her small steps were hesitant, almost apologetic against the gleaming wooden floor. The sunlight behind her framed her like a painting, turning her pale blonde hair into a soft halo. She wore her usual uniform, a simple gray and white maid dress, but there was something dignified in the way she carried herself, even in modest clothing. Ethan kept his breathing steady, careful not to give himself away. As she approached the table, her eyes landed on the thick pile of cash. Her entire body went still. She didn't reach for it, not even for a second. Instead, she pressed a hand to her chest as if steadying herself. Ethan cracked one eye open just enough to see her face. And what he saw made his throat tighten. Not greed. Not excitement. But fear. Real, trembling fear. Grace slowly sank into the chair beside the table, her hands shaking as she looked at the money. A single tear escaped her eye before she quickly wiped it away, almost scolding herself for even shedding it. She whispered something under her breath, a sound Ethan couldn't decipher but felt deep in his heart. And then she did something that made him freeze completely, every part of him locked in stunned silence. She prayed. Not for herself, but for him. She bowed her head, placed her trembling hand over the untouched stack of bills, and whispered a heartfelt plea. She asked for protection for her employer, for strength for him, for peace in his life. She begged God to ease whatever burdens he carried, saying she could sense pain behind his eyes, even though he always looked composed. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for favor. She didn't ask for anything for herself. She simply asked for Ethan's happiness. He felt his chest tighten, not from guilt, but from something deeper, something raw and unfamiliar. This girl who barely knew him, who was going through struggles he couldn't even imagine, was praying for him while sitting inches away from more money than she made in months. Ethan had expected honesty, maybe integrity. He had not expected this kind of purity, this depth of selflessness. Grace finally lifted her head, exhaling shakily. She wiped her tears quickly, as if embarrassed by them, then did something even more astonishing. She carefully gathered the money into neat stacks, straightened each bill with gentle hands, and placed the pile closer to Ethan's side of the table, without realizing he was awake behind her. She then took a small notepad from her apron pocket and wrote a message. Her handwriting was delicate, slightly tilted to the right, the writing of someone who grew up avoiding mistakes. "Sir, I found this money on the table. I didn't want it to be misplaced. I hope you're resting well. You work too hard. Please take care of yourself." She placed the note on top of the bills and turned away. But she didn't leave. Instead, she looked at Ethan, still pretending to sleep, and stepped closer. For a moment, she seemed unsure, almost afraid of crossing an invisible boundary. But eventually, she reached out and gently pulled a blanket from the back of the sofa, draping it over him with careful, trembling hands. She didn't touch him directly, but her kindness warmed the room more than the sunlight streaming in. Then she whispered something so soft Ethan almost wondered if he imagined it. "You're a good man. I wish life was kinder to you." Her voice trembled at the end. She pressed a hand to her mouth, holding back emotions she didn't allow herself to show. She didn't know he heard every word. She didn't know her tenderness had reached into a part of him long closed off. She didn't know she had changed him in less than 5 minutes. She turned to leave the room, her steps slow and heavy, not because she was tired, but because life had taught her to tread carefully everywhere she went. Ethan remained still until she disappeared around the corner. Only then did he sit up, the blanket slipping from his shoulders. He stared at the money on the table. Then at her note. And then at the doorway she had walked through. His heart thudded in his chest, overwhelmed by a mixture of gratitude, guilt, and an ache so deep he couldn't place it. Grace Miller, the quiet maid with shadows in her eyes, had just revealed more humanity than anyone in his wealthy world had shown him in years. As the evening passed, Ethan couldn't shake the moment from his mind. He thought about how she looked at the money, not with temptation, but with fear. He wondered what in her life had taught her to fear things others chased. He wondered why someone with such a gentle spirit carried such invisible wounds. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan found himself wanting to help someone not out of obligation, not out of responsibility, but out of genuine care. He found her later in the garden, watering flowers with slow, steady movements. She preferred quiet places, places where she could disappear into soft background sounds. She didn't see him immediately. Her eyes were distant, unfocused, as if she were lost in memories. Painful ones. And Ethan realized then, she wasn't just shy. She was hurting. He approached her gently, careful not to startle her. She flinched anyway, a small, instinctive reaction that made him freeze. That single flinch told him more about her past than words ever could. It wasn't fear of losing her job. It was the fear of people. And Ethan felt something inside him break. He spoke softly, telling her he appreciated her hard work more than she realized. Telling her the money wasn't a trap, but a clumsy attempt to understand her. Telling her she had done nothing wrong. Telling her he heard her prayer, even though she turned bright red when he said it. He didn't mention the blanket, but his eyes softened with gratitude she immediately recognized but didn't know how to process. And when she finally lifted her eyes to meet his, he saw something fragile yet resilient, like a flower that had grown through concrete. She didn't say much, but the small, trembling smile she gave him felt like a gift. From that day forward, something changed in the mansion. Ethan began showing up in places he normally ignored, helping the staff carry supplies, pausing to ask Grace how she was doing, leaving small notes of encouragement where she would find them. He wasn't trying to make her fall for him. He simply wanted to be the kind of man worthy of the prayer